Have you ever gazed upon a god among dragons and thought, he's kinda mid though, isn't he? Perhaps you think apocalyptic entities are capable of being scrunkly little dudes. Well, you've come to the right place. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thinly Veiled Tier Listing. Last time we did starter monsters, and a lot of people seemed to like that one, so today we'll be critically analyzing final boss monsters. This is a video essay channel, we do analysis and philosophy here, folks. Anyway, here's the tier list. Unlike last time, you'll actually be able to see me place the monsters on the tier list live. These are upgrades, people. Never say I don't treat you well. For starter monsters, I was pretty picky about what monsters I chose to include, and despite that, I still forgot Geodrome existed. Whoops. But this time the category of final boss monsters is pretty broad, and could mean a lot of things, so I will be including every monster I think could potentially be considered a final boss. That means we have a lot to get through, so get some popcorn and strap yourself in. Okay, before we get into the video, hold on. This took way longer to make than it should have, which means a bunch of stuff has happened since the last video. Now we have to talk about it, which is going to make this video even longer than it was already going to be. What a mess. Anyway, we hit 500 subscribers. That's exciting. I didn't think I was going to get this far. Hooray. But that also means we have memberships now. I don't want to pressure people into joining it. There's not a whole lot you get for it, but I figured I'd mention it because I do appreciate it greatly if anyone does choose to join. Of the benefits, you'll get some early access to videos, and I'll have like a thing at the end of the video with your name. I see a lot of people do that. So yeah, join Serving Hunt to slay, like the hunting diva that you are. Like, I didn't know what else to call it. I hope at least one person laughs. Okay, back to the video for real. What better place to start than the original true final boss of Monster Hunter, the foreboding Black Dragon, the bane of all hunters. I think the theming and lore makes Fatalis pretty top tier on its own. Back in the old games, he wasn't mechanically much of a threat, however. While he could pretty easily one-shot you, he was one of the most mechanically simple monsters. It wasn't until Iceborne that they made his fight match up to the aura his background gave him, and made him one of the most incredibly challenging fights the series has ever seen. Through all his inclusions in Generation 1 and 2 games, his quest was locked behind various hidden and arcane requirements, such as clearing all online quests, and slaying 100 Rathalos and various wyverns, which added to his mystique back then. I would say Fatalis is a god-tier monster. Moving on, we have Monoblos up next. Probably not what a lot of people would consider a final boss, but he is the last story-related monster you fight in Gen 1 Village. Monoblos really feels like a relic of an older time. He was only able to be fought in Village, so he was purely a solo challenge. Despite being fairly mundane, they gave him a lot of pomp and circumstance, and at least back in Gen 1, he was actually one of the higher tier threats. He's often criticized for being too similar to Diablos, though that would be solved by 4 Ultimate, where they actually made him mechanically distinct more than he already was. I think the biggest legacy of Monoblos is having to farm him for ages to get Monoblos hearts, because there was a handful of good gear that required one or more of them. To me, Monoblos is a good monster. I actually like him more than Diablos, and would like to see him come back in a later game. Lao-Shan Lung was the original siege monster, and again I feel like some respect needs to be put on him for that on its own. He's not the most engaging of fights, but he paved the way for many of the siege battles people love later in the series. For the time, I feel that he was pretty impressive with his size. Ultimately, his fight came down to just being a DPS check, but personally I have always kind of enjoyed fighting him in a mind melt kind of way, just zoning out and grinding some kills for gems. There were some neat mechanics that you could choose to interact with, like putting the anti-dragon bomb on his back when he walks beneath the bridge. Not before getting some carves first, of course. Ironically, the fort defense at the end of the quest is probably the most jank part of the whole thing. While you can use the ballista to deal some damage to him, you're likely to get knocked off from him banging on the fort. The cannons as well are mostly useless, since you have to bring the cannonballs from the middle area through the hallway of Ioprey, which just isn't worth it. After the Dragonator, your best option is to just keep smacking his belly and head until he dies. If your damage is high enough, you ideally kill him before he gets very far into the final room anyway. Lao-Shan Lung is a cute little man. I like him. And by the way, just to be clear, I had just a little guy on the last video, but cute little man and just a little guy are different things. I will not elaborate. If you know, you know. For the last of Gen 1's bosses, we have Crimson Fatalis. Essentially just a recolor of Fatalis, but now he drops meteors on you, and has the new addition of Armor Mode, where his entire body will periodically be lowered to a very low hit zone, making it very hard to deal any damage to him. Armor mode can of course be cheesed by things that deal hit zone ignoring damage, which you would be wise to bring. Of the three Fatalises, I think Crimson stands out as the least interesting, and at least from what I've seen, also the least liked by many people. I think Crimson was a result of trying to one-up Fatalis and making a souped-up version of him. However, considering the very humble beginnings of the series, it was the best they could manage. Oh, yeah, and shout out to him instantly killing you as the quest loads in unless you spam roll to the side to avoid him landing on you. I don't think he has very many redeeming qualities, so I'm going to put him down in mid. Moving into 2nd gen, the first monster I'd consider a final boss here is Lunastra. She was the final story fight of Monster Hunter 2 in Village. If you're familiar with 2nd gen, you'd be forgiven for thinking she's identical to Teostra, but they do have some minor differences. She's much like Monoblos, where she's only able to be fought solo in Village. This changed, however, in World when, along with a total remake of her mechanics, she became a normal monster you could fight. Old Gen Teostra has often been criticized for things like his funny charge move, and Lunastra shares those same issues. Additionally, many people didn't like her World iteration either. In Monster Hunter 2, though, Lunastra does have a lot of story importance surrounding her, which I think gives her some added interest. Going to the tower and climbing it for the first time to face Lunastra at the peak is a really cool and unique experience in Monster Hunter. Between Teostra and Lunastra, I've always kind of liked Lunastra more, and I'm even a fan of her in World. I'm putting her in Good Monster. Next up we have Akantor, the online final boss of Freedom 2. My fondest memory of Akantor is fighting him for the first time with my friend and getting walled for literally hours. We were a lot worse at the game back then, though. Akantor is surprisingly complex for his time. He's got a pretty wide variety of attacks and can inflict you with defense down, which is really detrimental against him. Akantor is one of the first monsters I'd say is remarkable for how much they leaned into making him a spectacle. While he can be pretty tough as a fight mechanically, they also made him quite a sight to behold, both visually and the way he attacks you, having dig attacks, causing eruptions in the ground, and a massive roar. For the time, this seemed a lot more over-the-top and boss fightish than a lot of other monsters. I'm a big fan of Akantor, so I'd say he's a good monster. The counterpart to Akantor is Ukanlos from Freedom Unite. While Akantor uses fire-based attacks, Ukanlos is ice-based. Ukanlos shares many similar attacks to Akantor, just with different theming, like his dig attack now moves through the ground towards you, kicking up snowballs, and an ice beam attack. So you might think Ukanlos is just going to go next to Akantor as a good monster, and that is true, he is a good monster. I actually like him more than Akantor even. However, we need to assess his little man status. Just look at that face. I think he speaks for itself. He's certified cute little man. Alright, move aside everyone, we have a big one here. Putting my bias out there immediately, White Fatalis is one of my favorite monsters ever. Unlike Crimson, who feels largely similar to the original Fatalis, I think White Fatalis is the member of the trio that feels like a little more of a distinct fight. Ironically, he's also probably the easiest, being very easily abusable once you understand his mechanics. That doesn't take away from the fact that he's just extremely cool, though. White Fatalis is a level of final boss that has not been seen since, and will probably never be seen again. Back in Monster Hunter 2, White Fatalis was locked behind a hidden quest to obtain 3 books, the Tome of Finality, the Tome of Dragons, and the Tome of Ancients. These dropped from various high-rank online quests and could at times be fairly hard to obtain. You could combine them together to form the Tome of Ancient Dragons, and this is what would allow you to fight White Fatalis. I feel like this is inarguably the coolest way to unlock a secret final boss. By the way, I guess this is as good a time as any to say this, but we're totally getting White Fatalis in Wilds, right? I know you all saw Zosia stand up and do the White Fatalis lightning. I'm almost certain he will be in Wilds at some point. Anyway, god tier monster. Befitting the addition of underwater combat in 3rd gen, Ceadeus is probably the most iconic of the 3rd gen final bosses, and maybe the most unique final boss in the series. I feel that Ceadeus cannot be separated from the context he exists in. He was one of the first monsters to have true narrative significance. Despite the guild having chosen to evacuate an abandoned Moga village due to the threat of Ceadeus, you as the hunter choose to face it alone to drive it off and protect the villagers' home. It's a very valiant tale, and the first time such a story had been told in Monster Hunter, and gives some interesting characterization to the hunter. Mechanically, I think he's pretty basic, but uses the underwater combat very well. Fighting him in a giant underwater cavern filled with ancient ruins and technology like a Dragonator is certainly an interesting backdrop as well. I think he's a good monster, but also a cute little man because he's furry and looks like you could pet him. Next up we've got Alatreon, 3rd gen's Fatalis analog. Now, I love Iceborne Alatreon. He's one of my favorite fights in the series. However, I tend to rank these monsters by their original iteration, or at least take it into consideration. Unfortunately, I've never fought Alatreon. So I asked my friend Sheikah, who has fought him. Here's what she had to say. He's a cute little man that's like 5 times bigger than Teostra. He also has true combos that can kill you from 100% health. And he has so much health, her and another friend timed out to him, farmed up DPS sets, and then still timed out to him. She's saying these as positives, FYI. So, there you have it. Cute little man. Shout out to Sheikah, by the way. Go follow her on Twitch. Jhen Mohran, the sand whale. He's huge. He swims through the sand. He can stab his back. This is why it's not so critical, folks. But seriously, Jhen Mohran is one of the few siege quests that you can actually fail due to not using the mechanics properly. Your ship's integrity will hit 0 if you don't use all the tools on the ship to deal damage to him and fend him off. He's kind of an evolution of Lao-Shan in that the siege part of the quest is actually engaging, and you can interact with him in more interesting ways, like climbing onto his back to smack his fin bits. Really well designed, I think. Good monster. Okay, look, I know I just did this, but I also haven't fought Amatsu in Portable 3rd. You may be noticing 3rd gen is a bit of a blind spot for me at times. It's definitely the generation I have the least time in overall. I did enjoy Amatsu in Sunbreak though, mainly due to the thematics. It's one of the most spectacle boss fights to ever be a spectacle boss. Not a whole lot of substance in the fight, but not every boss needs to be a crazy good fight. Thankfully, I can once again call on a friend to give me their opinion on Portable 3rd Amatsu. Let's see what Fish Kebab has to say. Based on vibes alone, it's God, because the presentation and music as well as the sound effects are all phenomenal. The fight is one of the easiest Monhan final bosses, and is mid at best, carried by its phenomenal presentation. Overall, cute little man. Such insightful commentary. There we are, cute little man it is. Another goated monster has hit the tier list. Dire Miralis, my beloved. He's basically Crimson Fatalis, but he can go underwater, and that makes him immediately cooler. I feel like a lot of people don't know about this guy. He was only in a single game, and you have to get all the way to the end of 3 Ultimate G rank to fight him. He's actually extremely interesting though. Throughout the fight he'll move between water and land, so you have to fight him in both formats. Underwater you can try to hit his big glowing spots, and while on land you can run screaming in panic from the meteors. In terms of final bosses, Dire Miralis might be in my top 3 favorites. God tier monster for sure. We're only halfway done, so let's keep it moving. I consider Shagaru Magala to be kind of the final boss of 4th gen. Gore and Shagaru are completely synonymous with 4th gen. They're the most flagship to ever flagship, and probably have one of the greatest lasting legacies. Gore Magala going through a metamorphosis into Shagaru Magala was a totally new concept and quite a narrative twist for the time. With a unique new mechanic like the Frenzy Virus and a fine balance between fight mechanic excellence and spectacle, Shagaru feels in many ways like the idealized form of a story mode final boss. This remained true in his future appearances. Even without narrative relevance, Shagaru ended up being one of the best monsters in Sunbreak. And considering the glow-up they gave to Gore in Wilds, I'm sure the inevitable appearance of Shagaru will also not disappoint. Shagaru Magala is going straight to the top of God tier. I feel like you could say the theme of 4 Ultimate was scale, as in the scale of the world around you, the verticality of the maps, the variety, and this applied to the monsters as well, with larger-than-life battles against monsters like Dalamadur, a ginormous snake that coils around mountains. This fight happens in many phases as it coils around the arena, giving you opportunities to hit various parts of it. It's a really interesting battle and quite technologically impressive for a 3DS game. It is fairly scripted as far as the actual battle goes, so once you know the fight, it's mostly just going through the motions until he dies. I don't know if I'd say he's a good monster. I like the way his weapons look, and he's certainly unique. But I don't think I've ever had a ton of fun fighting him after the first time. I'll put him in mid, but that's not to knock him too hard. I would be interested in seeing him come back to get a bit of a glow up in terms of his fight. The technology is a lot better now, so they could probably do way more with him. Continuing with the theme of scale, Gogmazios also fits the bill. The giant, tar-covered dragon that eats gunpowder, intertwined with the history of the city of Dondorma. He barely fits in the arena you fight him in. Gogmazios is a monster that balances siege mechanics in an interesting way, in my opinion. While you can absolutely fight him as a normal monster, you also have a variety of ballistas, cannons, and binders. There's also the Giga Nuke cannon that you can acquire ammunition for by doing a certain side quest chain. I feel like this gives you a lot of options in how you want to fight him. You can totally just slam him with all the siege mechanics, or use any combination of them as much or as little as you want, and either way it feels good. I'm a really big fan of Gogmazios. I think he looks really cool, and he's fun to fight. I'm torn on whether to put him in good monster or god tier. I think I'll be generous and say god tier. I grant him my favor. Nakarkos. Squid. Good monster. Ahtal-Ka, the mech-weaving bug. Thematically, probably one of the most unique monsters in the series, assembling a giant mech fortress that you have to scale in order to take him down. He's a very Generations Ultimate monster. GU really went off the rails with its design and had a lot of really crazy stuff in it, so it's only fitting that its online final boss is a guy that also does some really crazy stuff. And look, they're gonna kill me for this one, but I gotta be honest, I don't like Ahtal-Ka. I respect him as an interesting concept, but there's nothing about him that really fits Monster Hunter, in my opinion. He looks like he'd fit right in with God Eater or something, and I love God Eater, but it's not Monster Hunter for sure. Also, putting aside that bias, I actually just don't think he's mechanically very good. Much like Dalamadur, he feels like a very scripted fight, and that means subsequent fights against him just feel like going through the motions. Into the depths of mid he goes. Monster Hunter World gave us Xeno'jiiva, the alien-looking dragon birthed from the land's primal energies. There's many criticisms that have been made about World's attempts at storytelling, but I think the payoff in Xeno'jiiva is actually quite good. The thematics of fighting a newborn monster that is in the process of somewhat clumsily learning to use its incredible powers against you is really unique and a great way of tying narrative and gameplay together. I've always been a large proponent of storytelling in games being at its best when it's not just told through cutscenes, but intertwined with the gameplay that you can actually interact with and influence. And Xeno'jiiva approaches this serviceably. This does, of course, result in another very scripted fight that I've criticized previously, but I do think he stands above the others based on presentation. I'll put him in good monster. Shara Ishvalda is the final boss of Iceborne, and continued the work of Xeno'jiiva with strong thematic presentation. Shara Ishvalda feels a lot like a good old-fashioned monster fight against a particularly large guy. It doesn't have much in the way of gimmicks outside of basic Phase 1 and 2 mechanical transition, which can feel like a breath of fresh air after multiple back-to-back games of very gimmicky bosses. They once again knocked it out of the park with presentation, though, with Shara Ishvalda's otherworldly presence, the way that they made its eyes look into the camera directly, and its almost paranormal powers. I'm a big fan of Shara Ishvalda, but I must also assert its position as a cute little man. Look at his cute little face. He go wee woo. Rise brought with it All-Mother Narwa. While I have often been critical of Rise, Narwa is not included in that. Narwa has excellent music and presentation. I've often compared its mechanics to almost like an MMO raid boss. There's a number of mechanics you're meant to execute in specific ways, and I think that adds a level of uniqueness to her. In base Rise, I think she might actually be the best monster in that whole game. Good monster. Gaismagorm, the Dweller of the Deep, creature from below. I think the most interesting thing about Gaismagorm is the implications it brings with it. This massive creature that springs forth from deep underground brings with it the question of what else is down there. Is there some huge ecosystem of underground monsters we know nothing about? And considering Gaismagorm's rather horrifying visage, perhaps it's better left unknown. Design-wise, I think he's somewhat confusing, with his degenerated legs. We've seen monsters with degenerated wings, like Akantor and Ukanlos, and that makes sense, but a giant monster that kind of just drags itself around while also having a shocking amount of speed is a really strange design choice in my opinion. I've pretty consistently praised the presentation of monsters in 4th and 5th gen, but I think Gaismagorm is lacking in this department and doesn't have the mechanics to back it up. In fact, I'd say he's quite boring to fight. I think he's really mid. At long last, we've reached the modern era. We of course don't have a lot to talk about here, considering how new it is. Zosia is our most recent final boss. And what a good final boss it is, the equal dragon weapon given form. Absolutely fascinating from a lore perspective, having clearly been made from various black dragons and sharing many of their moves. The presentation of slowly ramping up its power over time until it becomes Diet Fatalis, not to mention being an excellent fight mechanically as well. Zosia is a monster I hold in the highest regard, right to the top of God tier. Finally, all done. Let's do a little final analysis so this video has anything of substance in it. What are the makings of a good final boss monster? Clearly, presentation is a major contributing factor. A final boss doesn't necessarily have to be very challenging or complex, but it should put on a good show. Generally, these fights have a lot of build-up or surrounding context, so you want to see something cool or unique as a payoff for it. However, a fight that's just mechanically solid is a great benefit as well. Monster Hunter is essentially a game about boss fights if you really boil it down, and everyone loves a good fight, in a mechanical sense. It's where Souls-like games have put all their stock and earned their fame from. On the other hand, a fight that doesn't wow you with presentation or leave something to be desired mechanically can feel like a letdown. Ideally, a fight can have both, like in the case of Zosia. I criticized fights feeling scripted a few times, and I think that's because usually fights in Monster Hunter are fairly dynamic. Monsters can be unpredictable at times, and not every quest goes the same way. When they make a fight with more rigid mechanical flow, it can feel jarring and boring. However, that rigidity comes with a purpose. It aids the presentation. It allows them to craft the experience to be displayed in a specific way. So while I do criticize it on a personal taste level, I also understand the role it can play in making some fights better. Alright, let's wrap this up. Final boss monsters collectively get a big thumbs up from me. Wahoo! Thanks for watching if you made it this far. Like, comment, and subscribe. See ya.